Hello everybody, my name is Lena, and today I'm going to be talking about the effect COVID-19 had on the US labor market. My goals for this project were to use MySQL to comprise different data sets to form a database and answer questions about the current labor market. I used JavaScript and Canvas.js with my database to generate figures with HTML files to display in the browser. I wrote SQL queries that highlighted key points and helped me gather more information from my data sets. And while looking at traditional labor markets, I also began to look at new service apps such as Instacart, DoorDash, etc., compare the two, see how the two were affected during COVID-19, and begin to make some predictions about the future of these kinds of service apps. So when starting this project, the main kind of data I was looking for were Massachusetts unemployment rates, labor turnover by industry, Instacart employment statistics, and some more general information about the effect that COVID-19 had on US employment numbers by region and by state across the US. So here are all the different data sets I ended up using loaded in MySQL, and these are a few examples of SQL scripts that I wrote to gather more information. So here is a screenshot from MySQL Workbench showing the top 10 unemployment rates between 2011 and 2021. Here we can see that the top value was 16.4% unemployment rate during April of 2020. And we can see that during that time, the labor force participation rate was 60.4%. And here we can see the exact information modeled in JavaScript. As I said, I used a library extension called Canvas.js in order to generate these graphs using JavaScript. And to summarize this data, we can see that in 2011, Massachusetts had just under 300,000 unemployed residents. And after 8 years of a steady decline, the unemployment rate rose to 16.4% in April of 2020. And this resulted with 500,000 unemployed Massachusetts residents. 1 year later, the unemployment rate fell back down to 6.4% right here, which is still higher than the 2.7 unemployment rate that we had just before lockdown, which for Massachusetts, that was a record unemployment rate. Here is another screenshot from MySQL Workbench, and we can see different industries across the US. So this database that I'm using has 14 different industries, and it breaks down the job vacancies in each industry from 2000 up until 2021. So this is a graph of some information from that previous database, and this graph shows the total percent decrease of available jobs per industry. So the 14 different industries are labeled here on the bottom. So you can see on the lower end, there's the information industry and the wholesale trade industry. Some of the higher ones we can see are the leisure and hospitality industries. And then everything else during COVID-19 kind of falls a little bit in the middle in terms of how the available jobs decreased. So here I wanted to take a closer look at the retail trade industry and look at its behavior between 2013 and 2020, and then take a closer look at that COVID-19 time. So we can see here in the beginning of 2013, up until 2018, 2019, there was a pretty steady increase of available jobs in this industry. Pretty steady, a few ups and downs, but it had a upwards trend. And then we can see here during that January of 2020 until April of 2020, we can see a really large decline in the available jobs, followed by a pretty drastic upwards trend of available jobs. And this graph on the right is a closer look at this selected time frame of COVID-19. We can see a little bit more clearly that decrease March of 2020 between May of 2020, and then a very steep upwards trend of available jobs proportional to lockdowns being lifted, vaccines being distributed, and everything beginning to open up again. And we can see this resulting in the current labor shortage that we're actually now experiencing in different industries such as retail trade. I took a similar look at the leisure and hospitality industry which had similar behavior to the retail and trade industry. We can see that from 2013 up until the start of 2020, it was a pretty steady increase of jobs, a little bit more stable in the upwards trend. And then the drop in available jobs due to COVID-19 was much more drastic in the leisure and hospitality industry. We can see that really big gap here. And on the right, we also have another graph taking a closer look at that COVID-19 time. We can see that March 2020, we can see that decrease of available jobs following by a pretty steep upwards trend of available jobs. And the reason I wanted to take a look at the retail trade and the leisure and hospitality industry is that in my own personal experiences of working, of things that I've seen that these two industries have had severe labor shortages. And after diving into some of the data, I can see the information to back that up. Another thing that really interested me when I was doing this analysis was looking at the rise of service app employment. So Instacart, for example, is a grocery delivery app where users can order their groceries from any supported market. I saw from my own personal experiences during COVID-19, there was a huge increase of people using these apps because places were being shut down. People didn't really want to enter the grocery stores. A lot of high-risk people decided to stay home, so they would have all of their groceries brought to them. And I could see this becoming quite popular during those very early COVID-19 months. So what roles did these industries have in the US labor market? How has Instacart performed during the pandemic compared to more traditional labor industries as a whole? And begin to examine unemployment rates and labor turnover through my own analysis. So a few interesting things that I found through MassURC was that finding the intersection between the top 12 cities for Instacart use and the top paying cities in the US, we could see a bit of correlation in that a lot of the top paying cities were pretty popular for Instacart use. So I found that pretty interesting. We can see places like Austin, Boston, Chicago, and we have the ranking between 1 to 12 in terms of where that city ranks in being a top paying city. You can see Austin is the second top paid, Boston is the third, Chicago is the fourth. And then a little bit lower, we can see Seattle and Washington on that lower end of that high paying ranking, along with the average salary. And here with information available online, we can see the number of Instacart shoppers between in 2014, 2016, and 2018, 19, and 2020. And this is a MySQL query on the right that shows basically the data inputs. And we can see the year, the amount of shoppers, followed by the previous shoppers. And we can see a pretty slow and steady increase between 2014 and 2019. And then during 2020 is when we can see a very drastic increase in the number of people working for Instacart. So we can see from 2019 until 2020, there was that 130,000 shopper growth. And this is a 284% increase, which is a huge difference. And yeah, we can see that Instacart found their highest growth of employees and revenue during the COVID-19 pandemic. And in context, a lot of this makes sense because a lot of the grocery stores were shut down, people weren't wanting to go. And on the other end, as we can see in the retail trade, in the leisure and hospitality industry, a lot of people were also losing their jobs. And so in my personal analysis, I can make a prediction that these two definitely have something to do with one another. A lot of people were losing their jobs and they needed a way to supplement income. So a lot of people are switching maybe temporarily to apps such as Instacart, to Uber, while things were a little bit more difficult in the traditional labor markets. So to summarize everything, Massachusetts had a record high unemployment rate of 16.4% in April of 2020. As of July 2021, there were 1,800,000 vacancies in the leisure and hospitality industry and 1,200,000 vacancies in the retail trade industry. And we can see up until this day, the service industry labor market is still experiencing a very severe shortage of workers. And in terms of different service apps such as Instacart or Uber, some things that are probably drawing people to work for them is benefits like flexible hours, you don't have supervisors or particular coworkers, no required location, etc. And these are attracting people to come work for these businesses. And these are all the sources. And thank you very much.